It's almost like sometimes it seems the less you try, the more of an impact you're able to make.
Possibly,
Because it's almost like if you go into a place, into a conversation, into an establishment, into a room full of people, with a thing in your brain of like, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to say this thing, this is going to be the outcome, I'm going to provoke change, and I'm going to leave. You're putting all this pressure on yourself to create this outcome, right? To say the right thing. Now it's all on you and your performance, because you're not going in thinking, how do I see these people? How do I make them feel loved and valued? How do I hear them? How do I listen to them? You're thinking, how do I go in and become the answer to their problems? How do I go in and become the solution to this space? Which now all of a sudden you're putting yourself in the place of God in a way, right? And even though you might be thinking, how can God use me? You're still going in with like so much of a plan as to what you are going to do to provoke change. And then you go in there and people don't respond the way that you had hoped, or they don't respond the way you thought. And now you go out feeling defeated, which means now you start going and strategizing how you can make a greater impact next time, rather than just being the kind of person who like sees humans, but just being the kind of person who sees the people you're in the room with. And it's crazy to me because, you know, I've noticed that, like I tell this story a lot. We did a show, and, you know, it's always great to have awesome volunteers, especially as a magician. I want people who come in and they're just like full of life and they're responding big and they're laughing at the jokes. It makes the person, it makes the show feel more engaging, right? Yeah. The more animated this person is, the more the people in the audience respond. And so I had this lady who came up and she was just such a dud, dude. Like everything, she was just sitting there, so boring, not reacting to anything. She's just sitting there like staring at everything I was doing. And this is like the finale. This is like the end of the show. This is the part that matters. And she's just the most boring volunteer I've ever had on the stage. And I'm sitting here the whole time like, I hate this lady. I will pick the wrong person.
What have I
screwed
done?
up.
I've ruined the show.
Dude, I've ruined it. People aren't thinking this is awesome because she's not thinking this is awesome. And I'm just stoked to get it over with. I finished the show. I'm like, oh, like it almost, I felt tired, right? And then afterwards, you know, I go out in the lobby and I'm hanging out with everybody. I love just being out there and getting pictures with people and meeting people. And this lady comes up to me and she's all, you know, tears in her eyes. And she's like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you so much for involving me in the show, for having me be a part. She was like, I'm a recent widow. She's like, my husband just passed away. He was supposed to come on this trip with me and he didn't come. So I came by myself. Normally we come here every year. I came by myself. It's my first time being here on my own. And you picked me. She's like everything you were saying, it was almost like you were speaking directly to me. And she was like, I couldn't believe it. She was like, I just was like stunned as you're saying this. She's like, it almost felt weird. Like everything you were saying as part of your messaging and part of the magic trick and all stuff. She's like, it was like speaking right to me. I just wanted to say thank you. And she's like crying as she's telling me this. And I'm like, Dustin, you idiot. Like you picked the exact right person, right? But I was so focused on how her response defined my worth. I was so focused on how her response defined my value. And how it made me look to everyone else, that I was in no way paying attention to what was actually happening in her heart. And had I been paying attention, I probably would have noticed her tearing up on the stage. I probably would have noticed that boring, stagnant look was actually just her sitting there in disbelief as she's like mourning the loss of her husband, thinking about how what I'm saying is speaking to her soul. It's exactly what she needed. And selfish me is like, what does this make me look like to everybody else? She's supposed to be louder. And that moment wrecked me, man. Like I just remember God challenged me so hard in that moment. Like stop physically looking at the tangible outcome to what you're doing. You have no idea. Like had that lady not come up to me and shared that, I would have thought that was a failed show. I would have thought that, but I had the luxury of her coming up afterwards and sharing. But how many times in our lives do we think that we said something or did something and no one even noticed or paid attention? And it turns out actually they were being impacted.
How would every day be if you could wake up every day and intentionally not worry about what anybody else thinks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just
and
life would be awesome.
And not worry about, you know, am I doing it right? Mm-hmm. And not being hard on yourself if you aren't.
Yeah.
How good would life be that if the last thing you worried about was what the response was?
Yeah.
Like that to me is the answer.
Yeah.
The response doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think there's like two different types of people. You're either a giver or a taker. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so like in these moments where we make it about us, it's like, how's this making me feel? How's this making me look? Like you're being a taker, you know what I mean? Instead of going into these situations, like how can I give? How can I see a person? How can I bless someone? Like Dustin said, when you go into a room, like it's not like who's going to encourage me? Who's going to bless me? What am I going to get out of this? But going into every room being like, God, show me who needs encouragement. Who can I? And that's the full life. Like that's how you find joy, right?
Yeah.
No, I've never met a taker that's joyful.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that too, because I spent most of my life being a taker.
Same.
And I think that the pivotal point in life is when you realize that you don't have to be a taker. That you that there's greater joy when you don't put you first.
Yeah.
Which they always said they always say in life, the man who becomes the most successful, and I'm not talking about monetary value, I'm just talking about life. Just the greatest success in life is when you stop worrying about what you get. It's when you start helping others.
Yeah.
You'll find your greatest reward when it's not about you. And
Yeah.
that's a journey that I've been on for a long time. And I don't know that journey ever stops learning.
Yeah.
Like you learn from it. But I do know that was my pivotal point in my life.
Yeah.
When it wasn't about me.
Yeah.
So good.
There's a book, I forget who it's by. It's called Follow Me. And as you're saying this, I'm like, it almost sounds too good to be true, because we have things that, we need to be working on, things that we need to be developing, things that God wants to do in us. But I think sometimes we have this perception of God where God looks at us and he sees all the things that need to be fixed, and his job is to just tell us what needs to be fixed so we can fix it and then come back to him and be a better Christian tomorrow, right? But as you're sharing this, I'm like, man, that does sound really easy. How good would life be if we could just stop focusing on ourselves and just what we need and serving ourselves? But the reality is that even those areas where we do need to change, how crazy that we have a God who doesn't just say, change this, do this, but he holds our hand and he walks with us through it, right?
That's right.
And as you're saying this, I'm like, man, it is crazy, this pressure we put on ourselves to perform perfectly. And it's not that our behavior doesn't matter, because it does, right? Like at the end of the day, I need to be a good husband. I need to be a good dad. Like I can't just say, well, I'm not thinking about what I need to change. I'm just going to beat my kids and like cuss at my wife and like, right? Like at some point I do need to worry about my behavior. But the fact that my behavior becomes shifted when a loving God accepts me, loves me, embraces me, holds my hand and says, Dustin, let's just be more patient today, man. Maybe you don't need to respond to your kids that way. Maybe there's a way to see your kids' needs here rather than just thinking about how that makes you feel. Maybe there's a way to see your wife rather than thinking about what you want. Maybe there's a way to, because that sounds so much more freeing and liberating actually than just saying, Dustin, you're selfish, right?
Yeah.
To say, hey, Dustin, what if you like saw your wife? What if you put your desire aside and you just kind of like, what if you just loved her today? Like, what if you just poured out into your kids? I know you got a big task list, but like, what if that stuff didn't matter as much as you thought it did? Like, what if your kids were more important than that, And the reason I'm bringing up the book Follow Me is because it talks about when Jesus called the disciples, he just said, follow me, right? He didn't say, hey guys, go fix this, change doing this, clean up your language, clean up your potty mouths, like, fix this, stop cheating, stop lying, stop competing, don't be selfish. And then maybe you can be people who represent me well. Like he just said, follow me. And he trusted that when they started to follow him, when they started to follow Jesus, that they would be so inspired by his goodness. Like Jesus knew this, that they would be so inspired by his boldness, his courage, his love, the power of his selflessness, that they would naturally start to change by simply being in his presence. That he didn't even have to tell them a lot of the time, right? You see the way that the disciples changed from the beginning of them following Jesus to the time that Jesus died and rose again, and now they're out. They became the people literally spreading the gospel. They were completely different people. These disciples, they saw Jesus loving people in a way that was radical. They saw him loving them even though they didn't deserve it, right? They're sitting here arguing like a bunch of children, and Jesus is continuing to welcome them in and to call them leaders and to send them out as leaders